Let's talk about Russia. It's just massive. 11 time zones. It's powerful for sure, but to a lot of us in the West, its actions can seem, well, aggressive, totally unpredictable, sometimes just plain confusing. So we're going to dive into this because here's the thing. To really get Russia, you have to start with its map.
You know, it was Winston Churchill who famously said this about Russia way back in 1939. And honestly, for a lot of people, that feeling hasn't really changed. It's like, how do you even begin to understand a country that seems to play by a completely different rulebook? Well, what if I told you the answer has been staring us in the face the whole time? See, the key isn't some complex political ideology. It's not some unique national character. It's geography. It's the mountains, the plains, the rivers, the coastlines. These are the unchangeable facts of life that have shaped Russia's biggest fears, its deepest ambitions, and pretty much all of its actions for centuries. All right, so let's crack this geographic riddle open. We're going to look at the two big problems that have really defined Russia's story. First, a serious lack of defensible borders, and second, this constant, desperate search for access to the world's oceans. Okay, first, you just have to wrap your head around the sheer scale of this place. We're talking over 6 million square miles. Russia is, by a long shot, the biggest country on Earth. It's not just a country, it's practically a continent. But as you're about to see, all that land comes with this huge built-in weakness. And that big weakness? It's flatness. Yeah, Russia has mountains and forests, of course, but the path to its core, its heartland in the west, it's just wide open. And that's a problem that has kept every single Russian leader, from the czars all the way to today, up at night. This right here, this is the North European plain. And you really have to see it for what it is, a giant, flat hallway. It stretches all the way from France, right across Germany and Poland, and points like an arrow straight at Moscow. There are no major mountains, no big rivers to get in the way. It's basically an invasion superhighway. And look, this isn't just some abstract theoretical threat. For Russia, it's a recurring nightmare. The Poles came in the 1600s, the Swedes in the 1700s, Napoleon's France in 1812, and then the Germans, not once, but twice in the 20th century. Every single one of them came from the West, marching right across that plain. Let me put it this way. If you look at the big conflicts, starting with Napoleon, Russia has been invaded from that plain, on average, once every 33 years. Just let that sink in. That means within a single person's lifetime, you could fully expect to see a hostile foreign army marching towards your capital. That changes how you see the world, right? So, okay, put yourself in the shoes of a Russian leader. What do? You can't just magic up a mountain range. The geography is what it is. So you do the next best thing. You build your own barrier, and your strategy becomes attack is the best form of defense. You realize you have to expand. You have to push your borders out to create what military folks call strategic depth. Basically, you need some elbow room. And that is precisely what Russian leaders did for centuries. Guys like Ivan the Terrible started pushing out from the Moscow heartland. They kept going west until they hit a natural barrier, like the Carpathian Mountains. They took over surrounding nations, Poland, the Baltics, Ukraine, and turned them into a giant shock absorber. The Soviet Union, with its Warsaw Pact allies, that was the ultimate version of this idea, a massive, layered buffer zone. All right, so controlling the flatlands helps with one huge problem, but Russia has this other geographic curse, and it's a big one. For a country that big, it has a ridiculously hard time just getting its ships out to sea. This all comes down to something called a warm water port. It's exactly what it sounds like, a port that doesn't freeze over in the winter, so your navy and your trade ships can get in and out all year long. And here's the catch. Russia has almost none. Its main port up in the Arctic, Murmansk, it freezes. Vladivostok out on the Pacific, it's locked in ice for 4 months of the year. And even when it's open, it leads into the Sea of Japan, which is pretty much surrounded by rivals. This lack of access has always been a chokehold on Russia's ability to be a true global power. So for hundreds of years, that was the game plan. The buffer zone, as brutal as its creation was, it kind of worked. But then 1991 happened. The Soviet Union fell apart. And from Moscow's point of view, both of its huge geographic problems just went from bad to catastrophic literally overnight. You know, when Vladimir Putin called the fall of the Soviet Union the greatest geopolitical disaster of the century, he wasn't just getting sentimental about communism. No, he was looking at a map. In the blink of an eye, Russia lost its entire buffer zone, the one it had spent centuries building. Its borders just snapped back hundreds of miles, leaving them exposed right on that open plain again. And then, from Russia's perspective, the West moved in, fast. First, in 1999, you have Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic joining NATO. Then comes the big one in 2004, the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, they all join. All of a sudden, a rival military alliance wasn't on the other side of the buffer zone anymore. It was right on Russia's front porch, just a couple hundred miles from St. Petersburg. That invasion superhighway, now the other team controlled the entrance.
And that brings us to Ukraine. Because when you look at everything through this geographic lens, you realize that Ukraine isn't just another neighbor. For Russia, it is the absolute key to its entire security strategy.
Just look at the map. Ukraine is sitting right there, on that southwestern edge of the North European plain. It also controls critical access to the Black Sea. For Russia, the idea of losing control over Ukraine isn't just a setback. It's seen as an existential threat. It's the very last piece of that buffer before the Russian heartland is completely exposed.
And this really lays out the stakes perfectly from Moscow's point of view. As long as Ukraine was friendly to Russia, or at least neutral, the buffer was damaged, sure, but it wasn't totally gone. But a Ukraine that joins the West? A Ukraine that joins NATO? Well, to Moscow, that means the buffer is gone for good. And even worse, they lose access to their single most important naval base.
And that base is Sevastopol, down in Crimea. This isn't just any port. It is the crown jewel. It's Russia's only major warm water port. It's the home of its entire Black Sea fleet, and it's their only real gateway to the Mediterranean. In one spot, it solves both of Russia's big geographic problems. Losing it was just never going to be an option.
So you can imagine when a pro-Western government took over in Kyiv back in 2014 and started talking about joining NATO, alarm bells went off in Moscow. They saw their absolute worst-case scenario playing out. From their perspective, the West had pushed them right to the edge. As Putin himself said, if you compress the spring all the way to its limit, it will snap back hard. The annexation of Crimea, that was the spring snapping back. It was a direct and, frankly, from this geographic viewpoint, a predictable move to lock down that vital warm water port.
So let's circle all the way back to that Churchill quote. He didn't just stop at enigma. The full quote goes, "But perhaps there's a key. That key is Russian national interest. And that interest, for hundreds of years, hasn't really been about communism or democracy. It's been defined by the cold, hard logic of its map. Secure the flatlands at all costs, and find a way to a warm water port."
At the end of the day, Russia is still a prisoner of its own geography. Its leaders, whoever they are, will always feel the immense pressure of that open plain to the west and the desperate pull of the warm seas to the south. Now, understanding this doesn't mean you have to agree with their actions, not at all, but it is the first crucial step to actually understanding why they happen. So the real question for the future is this: if the map itself never changes, how much can Russia's strategy ever really change with it?